Hey everybody, welcome to part 3 of this Zoom in where we're digging deeper on the drift we experience in life. So we've talked about drift in the family, we've talked about drift in the Monday through Saturday lifetime and sort of day-to-day experiences of life. And in this third part, we want to dig in and zoom in a little bit further on the drift when it comes to the church in general. So as a part of Northway, maybe you're part of another church. Churches in general, the big C, capital C church, or Christians, followers of Jesus in general, there's a larger scale drift that we all experience. And we got to be aware of it, and we've got to be willing and courageous to fight it. And so to talk about this one specifically, I have my friend Jason Stevens here. Jason, what's up? Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Hey, Dave. Hey, Northway.
Yeah, man. So Jason and I, we go way back to my days when I served at a church in Ohio. We served in the same town, Dover, New Philadelphia area. And Jason became a quick friend of mine when we were introduced. And I've known Jason. He pastors a church there. It's called the Church at Carter's Orchard, right?
Yep.
Right? Yes.
Yep.
Got that right. I always want to make sure I'm accurate. I'm representing the brand. So that's a funny joke there, representing the Carter's Orchard brand. But anyways, Jason is
CartersOrchard.com.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Jason's a pastor at that church, but he's also, I've known him as a pastor to pastors. He has this sort of connection to a lot of different people in ministry, and he sees the church from a very unique and I would say gifted vantage point. And he has a lens sort of on the church that I think it's important for us to hear from. So again, Jason, thanks for doing this. Thanks for taking time. And I guess we want to start talking about the church and drift that you see and you've experienced and that we need to be aware of. So how would you start talking about that? Where do you see drift when it comes to the church?
Well, I think that we are in a unique season experientially that helps us see drift.
Yeah.
I don't think it's impossible to see drift at other times. It's just that in 2020, because of some of the things that are happening, I think that we're able to identify it, because we're not identifying it in the sense that we're identifying that we are drifting. We've identified that we have drifted as churches, and the accelerated kind of nature of all of the different struggles and urgencies and challenges, not catastrophes, but like these things are driving us to find out, the cracks often diagnose the drift. It's seeing people argue about inconsequential things. It's seeing people, and I don't mean people, just church people. I mean like pastors and ministry leaders and, your staff, my staff. We're having conversations about things that really kind of move us to, a lot of conversation about best practices. And what I mean with best practices is just like, how are we going to do the next season? How are we going to do that instead of being focused on the different things that we're called to do as a church, building up the body of Christ into the mature stature that Jesus longs for, like in Ephesians 4.
Yeah.
That Paul, encourages us to. And so I think it's a good season to talk about that, because I think it's just super obvious.
Yeah. So like the circumstances we're living through have sort of accentuated or shown us like ultimately what we're most paying attention to and most worried about. And that's often an indicator of drift, right? Like maybe we've lost sight of our first love, so to speak, as a church.
Absolutely. But it's our first love, but what does our first love drive us to? So something that I've been spending time or even better yet, what does our first love ask us to do? So something that I've been spending a lot of time with this season is the Beatitudes into the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7. Jesus makes these statements that are basically what happened was I felt like I was drifting, and this is going to kind of sound funny, but I felt like I was being overly Pauline, meaning I was spending a lot of time in the letters of Paul.
I've never heard someone say that, but I get you.
Well,
Yeah,
for my heart at the time,
mm-hmm.
I just needed to go back to Jesus.
Yeah.
So Paul is directing and guiding, and he's giving orthodoxy and orthopraxy to the church. And I'm such a student, and I love that. I love that stuff. I needed personally to just go back and be a disciple of Jesus in this season, and then take my church back to that thing. So it's these types of statements. It's foxes have holes, birds have nests. I'm going to send you out to do ministry, to evangelize with nothing. Go to the house. If they'll let you stay there, preach the gospel. If not, dust your sandals off, go to the next town. That's not an American evangelical concept at all.
No.
And so, or hate your father, hate your mother, hate your brother and sister, even your children. That's not an American evangelical concept at all. Because we're taught to insulate ourselves like foxes and birds, have insurance for everything, 401ks, set up our futures. This is the drift from the raw message of our first love, Jesus.
Yeah.
And then, defend our families, insulate our families, do everything to create opportunities for our families. That's not Jesus's message necessarily, because his whole paradigm is eternal. His whole paradigm is sacrificial. And so I think what happens is we drift to these ideas that are far more what I'm calling right now. I mean, I didn't make up the term, but I think it fits the American evangelical kind of concept that's far more conservative Christianity, moral, kind of political idea than it really is Jesus following. And so I think that's, for me, I'm seeing that, and honestly, it grieves me a little bit for my heart, and then for the church.
I love what you said there. I was trying to think, like when you said, Jesus calls us to an eternal focus, and that made me think, like, okay, if we've drifted, we're in the opposite of an eternal focus, and that's maybe a bit more of a temporal focus, or a now focus. And in some ways, so in week 1 of this series, not to like re-preach what I talked about, but I talked about one of the ways we know we're drifting is when we look no different than the world. When we, as followers of Jesus, we sort of mimic, and we're identical to our culture. And that would be, I think I hear what you're saying. Like we've lost sight of the eternal, and we've paid attention to the temporal and the now. We feel like this is our home, right?
I was talking to a group of ministry leaders, pastors today, and I asked the group how many of that group had conversations about COVID, racial equality, and inequity, some of these topics that we've been talking about constantly.
Yeah.
Everybody raised their hand. And then I asked them how many of them were consistently inserting the gospel into those conversations by asking questions that penetrate the heart, that press us to empathy, that press us to sacrifice, love one another, sacrifice for one another, lay down our lives for one another, prefer one another above ourselves. And it was interesting. We all confessed that we're spending more time talking about the knowledge, the information, the facts, the article that we just read, because we would rather be right and smart and intellectual and witty than we ever would to be like penetratingly godly. I don't know if that's a word, but it's like we have been romanced by knowledge. And I don't mean knowledge is a bad thing, but what we do is we pick and choose the knowledge that we want to use for our argument.
Yeah.
And it really is antithetical to the gospel, because we're trying to win.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus he's never trying to win.
Right.
He's trying to save us. He's trying to save our souls. He comes. Yeah. So, anytime that we're trying to win as a church, we're trying to defeat someone. I don't think that looks like what Jesus, and if you look at it, Dave, the interesting thing about Jesus was killed for the message.
Yeah.
Paul was killed for the message.
Yeah.
Every disciple but John, and I'm not sure John didn't get the word, he was boiled in oil.
I was going to say, John had it pretty bad too, right? Sometimes we act like he didn't, but he did. Like he suffered.
Unbelievable. And then exiled to the Isle of Patmos.
Right.
where he writes, the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ. But it's it's them giving up their life for, and even to the point, even where we go back to like a simple churchman named Stephen, who preaches. He's hired to deliver goods and meals to widows.
Right.
And then he preaches one sermon. He calls people to repentance, tells them how terrible they are, and then they stone him to death.
Yeah,
He does not resist. He does not fight back. He does not defend. He just sacrifices his life for the gospel. We're far from that.
Mm. Mm.
It's an interesting message to try to teach to Americans.
Yeah.
And it really is.
Yeah. I think that's hard for Americans to speak to Americans, if I'm just like emoting in this moment, because I'm like, we are consumed in a culture. We're consumed in a bit of a worldview, in a perspective, but it doesn't mean we don't try. I'm not saying we give that up. I also love what you said about that, coming back to the words of Jesus and looking what he calls and says. I wrote down, I was taking notes, like, what does our first love ask us to do and to value? There's certainly a lot of drift, because the whole Corona, and whether your church gathered or didn't gather in person, it didn't stop the church from functioning, or didn't stop us as followers of Jesus from doing what he did. Is that right?
I mean, I think that I know that there are people that disagree with me, but and that's fine. Some of that's driven by sensibility, but in a lot of ways, I don't believe there's persecution in the United States right now. Now, I believe there's people coming against the church, but I don't believe there's persecution like what they experienced in first century Christianity, or even in other countries around the world,
Right.
where
Right.
there's hundreds of people every day that are jailed for preaching the gospel.
Right.
Our message has not been stopped. Our message has not been stopped, and in many ways, it's been expanded. Now,
It accelerated with the internet and the number of people who had access to it. It's almost like a breakthrough that we were praying for, but maybe not the one we had in mind.
It's allowed us to look at church differently, for sure.
Mhm.
I think it's allowed us to maybe be nonconformists a little bit going forward. It'd be funny for a church staff to say, hey, what if we took 4 weeks away from the building? Can you imagine this, like in February of 2020? Hey, we're going to take 4 weeks away from the building. We're going to focus on family development. We're going to just have some services. Yet people would be like, no way, man. Like, that's crazy. I mean, the weight and burden of proof that you would have to try and convince people of in that moment would have been really difficult.
Right.
Like, that would have been a heavy lift.
Yeah.
Now we've seen it. And so I don't think it's so much a matter that we're not back together at points as we can, and we'll get back to those things. And
Absolutely.
I mean, I long for that. But in 2021, if we said, hey, we're going to take 2 weeks, we're going to have online services, and we're going to do, we've all experienced it. We know it works. We know it's okay. We know we're not going to die.
Right.
So there are some interesting, raw Jesus things that we can experience maybe in a different way than we have. But we've got to be really pliable and moldable to be able to see it, and not just angry all the time, not just fighting for our rights, our freedoms. Or Bible talks very little about our personal freedoms and our personal rights. In fact, zero.
It's very communal, right? And very much give up what we love to follow him.
Yeah, the optimal flourishing of a Christian is to surrender like Jesus surrendered, hanging on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. They're not asking him to do that, and they're trying to kill him. Ironically, they kill him so that he can fulfill it, but they're trying to kill him to get rid of him.
Right.
They're not thankful or grateful at all. It's
Right.
the opposite.
Hmm.
And so we don't live like that. We don't. We pick too many fights in the United States, and we feel pretty good about ourselves when we do it.
I was talking with someone today, and I said, when you just look at social media and the environment, that it can be a very toxic environment. I'm not speaking.
Social media, that doesn't sound like the social media that I'm experiencing.
That's because you're on, like, what are you on?
I'm kidding. It's totally toxic. I hate it. Yeah, it's terrible.
But like, you look at that, and I see like some of and it's Christian against Christian. It's sometimes
Oh,
like sibling against sibling, or sibling, child against parent. And I look at that and I feel like some of that drift is like we're trying to win that argument, and we forgot about the relationship. And I look at Jesus and I'm like he was right. He didn't have to come down to earth. You know what I'm saying? Like he came
he
down
was
because
in
he valued the
heaven.
relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes we devalue that because we're trying to focus on this moment, and
Hmm.
we miss the bigger picture and the bigger story, and we
Have
drift.
I have I told you my story about almost drowning in the ocean?
Yes, you told me, but to everyone else listening, I'm positive you did not tell them
Okay, well, last year I tried to swim from one place to most people, if you think about it, you haven't swam to a destination in the ocean.
that.
You've swam around in the ocean, but you just like leave your feet, swim around, put your feet back
Play. We're not like
down.
traveling.
Yeah. No.
Right.
So there's a sandbar down in Sarasota that I wanted to swim to. I saw some people out there at low tide, and I was like, I'm gonna swim there. So I went down there, and I almost drowned doing it. Nobody was around except for my wife. She would have just watched me. She videoed it. It looks like I'm killing it,
Of course.
but I'm like almost dying.
Yeah.
Like I'm almost dying. Here's my point. I was thinking about this. The ocean is undefeated.
Hmm.
Like if you've conquered something in the ocean, it means that you went in and you did something, you got back out.
Yeah.
You can't. The ocean never stops. It doesn't have. It's not emotional. I mean, Laura was a little emotional, but it wins. It never stops.
Right.
I was trying to analogize kind of the church, and so I was thinking, what we've done as a church in the United States is culture is the ocean. It never stops. It never stops. It's run by the prince of the power of the air. It's always going to be just filled with evil. We're strangers and aliens in the world. And we live here, but what we've done is we've kind of created these cruise ships. And if you've ever been on a cruise ship, man, you walk in, it's like the Taj Mahal. It's 50-foot ceilings, and like you just walk in, you forget it's unbelievable. Like it's so big.
Massive. Right.
5,000 to 8,000 people, and there's buffets and games and shows and activities, and you really have to walk to like a deck to get to like, oh yeah, we're on the ocean. And you have community, and you're talking and you're having fun, and it's good. It's a good time.
Yeah.
This is, I think, very similar to the church. We've created these, but you forget you're on the ocean because you're up above the ocean, you're sailing, you're going to a destination. The interesting thing is that cruise ships have a destination, but they drift. They have, even in their purposeful desire to get to the destination, they still drift. And the people in the ship are not as focused. Like if you said, hey, we're going to Aruba, and you ended up in Puerto Rico, if you were on the ship, you'd be like, I didn't even know that we were.
Never even noticed the difference. Right.
I didn't even know that we didn't go to the right place.
Right.
What has happened over 2020, I think, is that we've had to move from our cruise ships, and this is even for a church like Northway, this is really applicable. We've had to move from our cruise ship, and I'm not even saying that's all bad. I'm just saying it's big, and it's, there's so many. I love the word accoutrement. There's so many accoutrements to take part in, extras for the hillbillies among us. So
what are you talking about? We know what that means.
Okay, so I just want people to think I'm pretentious. So
mission accomplished. You're good. Hey, by the way, for everyone listening, Jason and I, we're good friends. We love to joke around and mess around. So he is one of the least pretentious people that I know. So
yeah, I mean, maybe a little pretentious. So I don't even mind it. So
like frills and the comforts and the conveniences and the feel goods, right? And that's, I hear you saying that. Like,
COVID has moved us to smaller boats, and we're down by the water, and we might have to row a little bit, and we don't have as many people to talk to,
really good.
And our communication, we're a little bit bored. But here's the point. And by the way, we're right by the water. We can reach down and touch the water out of the boat. It's like, man, society, culture feels like it's right there. Like COVID is in my town. racial equality, that they're literally marching in my town. People are angry in my, and by the way, I'm in a little town and country area in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah.
Here's my point. My point is that the same things that we feel called to while we're on the big ocean liner,
Yes.
the same things we're called to
Right.
as well. But we've lost sight of that because we're trying to get back to the multimedia, the extras of all of the things that we're used to, the big worship environments, all these things.
Feels, right? The feels and the like, I love this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's not wrong, but what I hear you saying is
Product of
it could be a craft.
pursuit.
Yeah.
It's a product of the pursuit, but now it seems like we've drifted to where we're just trying to get. I hear this all the time. I just want to get back to normal.
Hmm.
Well, if normal is sacrificial Christ following, great. But if normal is a certain time and a certain place and a certain environment and a certain feel, a certain accoutrements, that's problematic.
Hmm.
That's problematic. And that's usually what makes us, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do this, or I want to do this, or I'm frustrated with it. Peel all that back and then just say, am I pursuing? And by the way, to the pastors on your staff, are we leading our group to sacrificial surrender and pursuit of Jesus more than we are offering the extras and benefits of just community? Because by the way, there's clubs. The Rotary Club has benefits. They have a golf outing, they have monthly meetings, they have fundraisers, and they do community things. And you can be a member at the golf club, and there's all kinds of things as humans that we can be involved in that aren't after Jesus, that are fun things to be involved in. We have to make sure that our drift in church doesn't begin to look like that, which is what you were saying 10 minutes ago.
So our distinctive is that we're walking in the dust of the rabbi, and that we are like.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Jesus does. I mean, we should be dirty because we're close to him and we're following after him. And it's a good wake-up call. I love hearing your perspective, and I'm probably going to have trouble shaking that cruise ship boats analogy. The mission never changed. The call and the opportunity for ministry in this season never changed. Actually, in the little boats, it might even be more evident.
More opportunity.
More
opportunity.
Yeah.
More opportunity if you'll take it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're waiting for somebody to call you back to tell you what to, I think that you're going to struggle with this. But if you're saying, man, I've had neighbors that I don't even know that have shamed me as a Christian because they've come to my house and brought food to us during COVID, or they don't even know us. I had one of our neighbors start a Facebook page, like Friends of 15th Street. I live on 15th Street. And I was like, oh, I should have done that.
Yeah.
I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, and somebody else had to show me how to be a Christian and a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, and probably not a Christian or a pastor, I'm sure. Yeah.
I think the tone of this conversation, if you're listening and you're starting to feel guilt and shame, like that's different than conviction. Like we need to know the difference between those voices in our hearts. And I think this is a call to awaken our sensibilities. And I love that. So let's come back. I always go back to that Matt Redman song, The Heart of Worship, where it's all about you. Like, let's come back to what's Jesus asking us to do? How are we following him versus what are we frustrated by? That's a drift to pay attention to. That's really good. I love your insights. I love your eyes.
Guilt and shame weigh us down. Conviction conviction is a beautiful thing from the Holy Spirit.
Right.
It has to be driven by Scripture.
Right.
It has to be driven by the voice of the Lord.
Right.
But then we get to change.
Right.
So if you're like, man, this is a little bit heavy-handed, then just choose to change. Like just go, oh man, I don't like that. Okay, wait. We'll just identify it and then go, oh Lord, I want to reset.
And there's a difference between conviction and guilt and shame. Guilt and shame, it attaches to our identity. And we start to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm a bad person. Conviction is like, oh, I see a better way. And I'm going to walk. Conviction leads us to freedom. Guilt and shame leads us to a destroyed identity and more of that. And so that wasn't in the script. We don't have a script, but I think that's important to understand the difference between those two.
For sure. And the beauty is is if you'll jump into 1 Timothy 4 or 2 Timothy 4, Paul's admonishing this young pastor how to be a pastor, how to be an elder.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to, he names a bunch of things that he wants him to focus on. It's all the things that we long to focus on. But he says in 1 Timothy 4, I believe it's 1:16, 15 and 16, says, practice these things, immerse yourselves in them so that you may all see your progress. Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by doing so, you will save yourself and your hearers. Oh man. Like, I'm sorry, I said 1 Timothy chapter 1. It's 1 Timothy chapter 4, 15 and 16. But persist. Like, you have to, Paul says in Galatians, he says, for freedom Christ has set you free. Now, I think this is such an interesting thing because it's like, God, the Holy Spirit knows human beings so well. He says, stand firm, therefore, and do not return to a yoke of slavery.
Yeah.
Man, we have to like earnestly persist,
Mm-hmm.
or watch, we drift.
Yeah.
The natural default is drift.
Right.
You can't not drift. Culture is always moving you. The ocean of culture is always moving you to somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it will never stop. It's not sensitive to you.
Right.
Satan wants to destroy you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the natural default.
I think you said earlier, the ocean is undefeated. And yet, I know you know this and you're saying this too, is like through the power of Jesus in us, we can stand firm. We don't have to drift.
Right. Every metaphor breaks down at some point. So of course we're not saying that we can't stand
right
in the ocean of culture, and we can. We're
called to.
We have to persist. We have to stand firm. Therefore, we have to be very careful that we have our eyes. You know, if you want to take the metaphor to the parable, just picture Peter. What happened to Peter? Took his eyes off Christ, went down.
Mm-hmm. Went for a swim.
Jesus reached in, which is the beautiful idea of salvation, and lifts him out. The thing that we don't talk about enough is, how did Jesus get back to the boat? He walked back to the boat with Jesus.
I've never thought about that.
It's an amazing thought. He walked back to the boat with Jesus.
He just carried him back, maybe?
No.
I don't know that you can prove that, but I hear what you're saying.
You can't prove I'm not right. Isn't that the burden of proof that we seek in 2020?
You're saying.
You can't prove I'm wrong, so I'm right.
I love that, like, intuitive, inquisitive mind. Like, so how did he get back in the boat? I'm like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. That's what you do.
I have a moment here and there.
That's not true. Hey, thanks for your time. I think this conversation is so enlightening and challenging in a good way, and brings us to lift our eyes. And like Hebrews 2 says, we have to remember what we've been taught, lest we will drift.
Yep.
So I hope this is helpful and good and convicting in a good way, so that we would remember Jesus, our first love, and do what he did. Jason, thanks. Appreciate you. Love you, man. Northway, thanks for tuning into this. I hope this has been good and helpful and has caused you to walk closer in the dust of the rabbi like we talked about. Take care, everybody. Thanks.